Once again, we're back on the 60 MGA doing some final assembly. Okay. So now I'm just now putting on the pin for the latch. We want to do that before we put the grill in, because if we're trying to adjust this and it gets stuck, the only way to get it open again is through the grill. So you always do that before you get that far. Now, when I did the bodywork on this pin wasn't in here. So I really don't know for sure how much adjustment there really was in it and how close to centered it truly was when it came apart. And I didn't initially take it apart. And that's my fault for not putting this back in and double checking things, because that could be a problem, which you'll see in a second it actually is. But when you go to put all this together, you just want to be very careful. You want to let this down easy and then just slowly push on it and see how it feels. If it feels like it's roughly centered in the hole or not, and then see if it's trying to pull it one way or the other, and in this case it's wanting to pull toward that side, leaving me with a bigger gap here than it is here. Now I've already adjusted that as far that way as I can go. And unfortunately, that's just much easier to use than this is for now, because this assembly only moves forward and backward. It doesn't move left and right, which means I'm going to have to work on this, or work on the pin to get the left and right adjustment there. So I'm going to have to play with slotting the holes just a hair more to get it where I need it. So this has slots in it going this way, and there are slots going this way on the bonnet. And then the lower latch also has slots going the same way, giving you plenty of forward and aft adjustment, but not so much left and right. And there's no captive nuts in the bonnet. There's actually, you use washers and nuts on the back side. So let me get this up in there and we'll see how much adjustment we got. Now the other thing to consider here is this pin, when it goes up through, there's a hole in the bonnet that goes up into, and maybe there's not enough clearance around that to get it slid over to where I need it. But now that I got it in place, let's see what it does. Yep, I'm going to say it's the center hole that's actually preventing it from moving any further. So it's not the adjustment slots that's actually causing the problem. It's the center hole that this goes up through. I guess you guys can't see that's out of range. The center hole that this goes up into, it's all the way against the side and won't adjust any further. I didn't actually gain any adjustment with the 1/4" bolts at all. So the bonnet on this car must have been sitting a little bit to the right before it was tore apart. And I know, and he took it apart before, and I made the assumption that it was sitting okay and never checked that when I was doing body work. That's my bad. So now I gotta go back here. I'm going to have to degrind a little bit of this out and then put some paint on the edge there to get it sitting where I need it. All right, now so to do the upper turn signal, like I said before, is a little bit more complicated than doing the lower brake and tail light. But you got to get this thing, get the wires through here. And then pull that all the way up against the base and make sure your holes are actually lined up to the screw holes. And then you can wire this up. And in order to use these are, like Moss calls them, what, ground connectors. So you put these connectors over the wire. And then you basically just bend all the wires around the outside, just like that. Or some people will bend them all to one side, and I like to just bend them a number of places. And then we just, of course, put the ground wire, be on the base here. So probably want to go on that side, and then this one goes through here. And then you put this back in there and line this up to all of the screw holes and put the screws in it. And that's just the base of it. Now these aren't actually the correct screws, but these are the screws that came out of it, so that's what's going back in it. Because now these have been put in it in the past, the correct screws will never hold now. They're originally I think a 640 machine screw, I think it was, if I remember correctly. But since these sheet metal screws were put in there in the past, you know, the threads are never going to hold now. So that's what's going to go back in, is exactly what was taken out. It's not uncommon to find different types of hardware in these things, because over the years, people that have worked on them, you know, wouldn't necessarily know what was supposed to be in them, or didn't have anything on hand and just put something that they thought would have been right, or whatever they had on hand to make it work. And then you end up with stuff like that. So we do the same thing with all these. And what I like to do in this case is just do them, you know, if you're not 100% sure about the collars, just do them one at a time, you know? Just go ahead and take the red one out, do the red, then the green, and then the black. That way you don't have to worry about trying to remember exactly where they go, or looking up the wiring diagram if it's a case like this where when it was taken apart the wires were just cut because we knew we were putting a wiring harness in it anyway. So it means you don't have to necessarily refer back to the wiring diagrams. Otherwise you can look at the wiring diagram and figure it out pretty easily. The old ones used to be tapered, so they could slide in a whole lot easier. But these give better contact than the old ones do. Or did. In this case, this is grounding, comes to this side and then jumps over to that side, so there's two ground wires. They both go in here at once. Actually, I misspoke here. The ground wire comes into the bottom light and then goes out to the top light. There we go. All right, turn the lights on, see if we get a marker light. Well, now I'll have to do some checking with a multimeter to see if I got power here. And and see if we
Make sure I pulled the right one.
The one with the L on it.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And the lights came out on the dash.
All right. Well, we'll have to check it with a multimeter or a test light to make sure, because I should have had one side lighting up there. Or, oh, you know what? Of course it's not going to work. I haven't put all the wires together underneath here on the side of the frame yet.
Oh.
Let's do that and come back to it. All right, now that I connected the wiring harness over there, we got a marker light here like we're supposed to. And then, which way is the turn signal? Left. Let's see if we got, because I'm not 100% sure this bulb's any good. They were just working a second ago. All right, now that I got all the lights in, both sides, turns out there's actually nothing wrong at all with the turn signals, just because with the other side disconnected, we were actually trying to use the wrong turn signal. But now everything's working exactly like it's supposed to. And we got brake lights. So now this is all ready for lenses. All right, now we'll start putting lenses on here. And this one here has a seal that goes underneath of it. It just goes on just like that. And then screw this on there. This lens isn't perfect. A couple of scratches in it, but we cleaned it up, and this is what we're using on this car. Now, the other one's cracked, so it's possible we might end up at a later point just buying a pair of them and putting them on there. We'll see how much they actually cost. And then just screw it on. But it might be easier at this point to actually put on this lens first before we actually put this one on, because this one's kind of a pain in the butt. See this rubber here? This lip has to go up underneath that rubber. So you got to get that and down in here. And then you can't quite get it to sit in there because you're hitting the screws for the base. So then you got to just carefully work it around until you get it in there. Which means if you're working on a car where these rubbers are not brand new, it is actually quite easy to ruin the rubbers putting these lights in. It's actually not so much this portion of it as it is the chrome piece. That's the one that's the real pain in the butt to put in without damaging the rubbers on an old seal. And like everything else these days, they don't fit as good as they used to. The tolerances and production tolerances are a little off, so this is really, really tight fit. And it shouldn't be quite as tight as it is, but if you work it, eventually it gets itself in there. But the tighter this fits, the harder this is to put in, because you're doing the same thing, but you're trying to get that in here. So, and you can't put this one on until that's in. And this one's super easy to damage the seal on. Like I said, you can start going around, working this around on an old seal, you know, fixing an electrical problem, and this whole end just, the whole edge of this just pops out and rips out, and then you're having to buy a new seal, whole new seal, which is of course the whole assembly all the way back in, the rubber is. When you're working on these things for a living, it really sucks that you got to always keep that stuff on hand if you're working on something like this, because they can be so easy to rip them apart, and then you got to replace it in order to give it back to the customer. And there you go. So that's how you get that on there. Not wanting to get started. There we go. So that's one side tail light put together. As soon as we dig through the boxes to find the other little chrome trim here and decide what we're doing about the other tail light, if we're going to use the one that's got a little crack in it or not, then I can put the other side together. And that's a good looking tail lamp assembly, I think. I like these better than the 1500s and much better than the Mark IIs myself.